Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live. Talk radio without the static. Email your questions and comments to lynncullenshow@gmail.com. And now your host, Lynn Cullen.
And good morning to you, I think. Oh, I'm sorry, I knocked that music off a little too soon. Forgive me. In a rush to get going. I hope you're hearing me okay. I've got that annoying error message up saying that things might get a little squirrely, but at this point, I think we're okay. I'm glad the Phillies won. I'm glad the Eagles won. Yeah, I have nothing else to say. I could talk about the halftime show, but I'm not going to. I could talk about the commercials, but I'm not going to, because that's what we used to do back in the day when, when we had a country and we understood how pretty much things worked, and there was a generalized sense of safety, and, well, whatever that was that we took for granted, it's gone, and nothing feels normal, and it should not. So I really don't want to talk about all that stuff. That is in our personal lives. That is in the part of our lives that we must continue, that give us pleasure and respite and some distraction. But the reality is, we are living in a time, the word I always go to is consequential, but that doesn't even quite do it. It's consequential like it was consequential at, in 1776. It's that consequential. And I, as you know, have my concerns about whether or not we Americans who have lived our lives in that aforementioned sense of security and relative comfort, consequently making us pretty soft, I think, in many ways, and privileged. It's why we looked with such respect at what we call the greatest generation, because that generation, my parents' generation, saw incredible crises, potentially crises that could destroy their lives, their way of life, and they rose to them. And we've never had anything like that in ours. And I just hope that somehow we will find in ourselves whatever mettle, whatever courage that is necessary to meet this moment. We are watching an elected president behave not as an elected president, but as a monarch. so many of the things he is doing through executive order, diktat, are things that our government has the capacity for him to do through legal channels, through the means by which all other presidents have accomplished their goals. And that is through, obviously, working with the other parts of the government, the legislative branch and the judicial branch. What we're seeing now is order by, governance by fiat, when, and the legislative branch is gone in fealty to him, and the only other branch we have, the judiciary, is in some instances, and we've seen them, acted as it is to act and put a stop, even temporarily, on some of his orders, saying, can't do that. We got to talk about that. And we saw this weekend that he and his vice president and others are saying that the courts can't do what they've done, which is, of course, untrue. The courts are doing what the courts have always done, their job. And we are now seeing what many feared, that even if the courts try to stop clearly illegal and or unconstitutional actions, this administration will simply ignore them and proceed. And then what is to be done? And then what is to be done? Our system has no answer to that. The founding fathers, these visionary men, didn't envision such a thing. They made the assumption, which we as a people have made up until this moment, that we would all agree to honor a certain framework and work within it, even if we truly disagreed, but we would work within the framework. And that is what, and when presidents in the past have ignored the framework in now what seem like silly little teeny weeny ways, the hammer came down on them and the system prevailed. And that is because we had a functional legislative branch and a functional judiciary and an executive that still had some people who honored the framework. That is gone now. And he controls everything. So if he defies the federal courts, if he defies the Supreme Court, if even that lackey court tries to stand up to him, what are we to do. There have been times in our history when judgments of the Supreme Court have been ignored. I'm thinking of the civil rights era when the courts said that schools had to be desegregated, and Southern jurisdictions and Southern governors stood in defiance of the Supreme Court and said no. Well, what happened was, because we had a functional government, the federal government, the executive branch, sent troops, sent the military in to ensure that the order of the court would prevail. This was big stuff. This was heavy stuff. This doesn't happen very often in our country, that our own government takes military action against other parts of the government, but it's happened in my lifetime. It ain't going to happen now with this, because the people who are abrogating all of the functions of the government, the honorable, what has always been the honorable agreement by all parties in our government that certain rules would apply, these are the same people that now control the military. So what are we to do? I'm going to read you a little bit from former Labor Secretary Robert Reich. Arbitrary power, which is what Trump is wielding, these kinds of grabs of power rely on the acquiescence of everybody subject to it. And man, we've seen, I'm not reading him. We've seen that acquiescence by powerful men, by Bezos and Zuckerberg and corporations just falling in line even before they've really been put in a position where they had to. They've acquiesced even before they had to. Not that you ever have to, but that is really troubling, because that's exactly what happened in Germany with Hitler's rise. Back to Reich. Trump wants you to feel powerless. He depends on your passivity in the face of his takeover of American democracy. He wants to be the king who will act unilaterally, arbitrarily, can issue orders about anything that pops into his head. I mean, we've seen this. Purging, firing, prosecuting, deporting, obliterating, freezing, pummeling any institution he wants destroyed, any person he wants destroyed, unleashing the richest man in the world to do whatever the hell he wants with the government of the United States. And if you are dumbfounded into inaction, if you don't even want to hear the news, if you feel as though you're living through a nightmare over which you have no control, I get it. I feel the same way. But hear me out. You and I have no real choice but to stand up to Trump, Musk, and their lapdogs. To allow them to bully us into submission invites more bullying. We know this. More lawlessness. You see that people are in their ways starting and are, we know the phone lines flooded. Thank you guys. They're getting mail, all this stuff hasn't stopped them. April 19th, which is not too long ago, he points out, marks the 250th anniversary of the Battle of Lexington and Concord, which essentially started our fight for freedom from a king. Americans who were showing that they were free men refused to disperse when the king's troops told them to, and shots were exchanged, and 8 Americans were killed. So were some British soldiers, and the revolution began 250 years ago. This nation was founded on resistance to monarchical and arbitrary authority. We built American democracy in the face of what seemed at that time to be truly impossible odds. They took on the British Empire. Reich says that a friend of his suggested, and it's a good suggestion, it's just one of many that's starting up, but hear this one out. April 19th, when Americans stood up to the monarchy. How about on April 19th? Americans today stage massive protests in every city, in every town, acknowledging the anti-monarchical uprising of 1775 and pledging our allegiance to that heritage. Just one of the many things that people are putting out there as something that we can do. I have I've pulled little, there's so much, the flooding the zone tactic that they have, that things, that you would normally, have said, well, I got to talk about that. Oh my God. Oh my God. And then, 3 hours later, it seems like nothing. But I want to share with you um, a few things that I did pull. Just again, to remind ourselves the horror that these people are unleashing, not to paralyze us, but to harden our resolve to stand up to them. As I speak, children are dying because of Trump and Musk. People are suffering. In sub-Saharan Africa, which I understand the mag rats don't give a shit about, because even though they may be Christians, they don't recognize the common humanity of people in Africa. We have been sending money to those poor nations that has been used for decades to feed literally starving children, to supply life-saving drugs, to provide humanitarian assistance that saves people's lives. In just a few weeks, Trump and Elon Musk have burned decades of that work that this country has done, has burned it to the ground, completely gutting the agency that oversaw it, the United States Agency for International Development. I saw a picture that made me sick. They have not only thrown every person in that agency out of work, ceased all of this aid to people, needy people. They even went so far as to get workers to literally take the signage that had been on the building in Washington, D.C., that said United States Agency for International Development, USAID. They unscrewed every letter from above the front entrance. And I saw a picture with all those letters lying in a pile on the sidewalk. Of the 10,000 American employees that are all over the world overseeing this aid, 10,000 of them. Do you know how many now remain in Africa? I mean, able to function at all. I don't know if they're still physically there. They've been ordered home. In the entire continent of Africa, 12. 12. And as the true scale of what Trump and Musk and the United States has done, African governments they don't know what to do, because they rely on this money. It's in their budget to feed their starving people or the refugees that they house. Budgets that they relied on are decimated. And who's paying the price? People, regular, ordinary, non-powerful people. Who will die? Who will starve? And then there's all the people who worked. In Kenya, they figure up to 40,000 Kenyans are losing their jobs because they were part of our apparatus in just that one country. We, up until Trump took office, provided most of the funding for 2 huge refugee camps in northern Kenya that have almost 1 million desperate people in them from over 15 nations. And now there's no food, no medicine. Is this what Americans voted for? This cruelty? And then there was this that just so blew me away, I couldn't see straight. It turns out President Trump is extremely worried about racial discrimination in South Africa, Elon Musk's birthplace. South Africa, that gave rise to one of the greatest leaders, global leaders since, well, Mahatma Gandhi and maybe rivals him, Nelson Mandela. Yeah, arose out of the horrors of apartheid South Africa. And it turns out that President Trump has now ordered that all American assistance to South Africa be halted, and any monies going to South Africans will be used to prioritize white South Africans, who he called Afrikaner refugees, even allowing them special immigration status. Yeah, oh yeah, they're actually going to let some people in. Racists. White racists from South Africa are going to get around the halt in refugees. You can't make this up. In addition, it says here, I'm quoting, in addition to the halt in foreign aid, Trump ordered officials to provide humanitarian. Oh, he does care about humanitarian assistance in Africa. Look at that. But you have to be white. You have to be a South African white person. He feels bad for him because when Nelson Mandela came in, well, they lost a lot of their status and their power. A little bit of their land. They own the whole fucking country still. To this day, white South Africans who make up, get this, 7% of the population of that entire country own almost all the farmland. And they're crying. And they're desperate. They're in need. These are the people who were so brutal in dispossessing the natives of that land from their land. So Trump has signed off on humanitarian aid, yes, to Africa. White Afrikaners. And this aid is specifically to allow members of the white South African minority to seek refuge in the United States through our refugee program, which, last I heard, had been put to a halt. Oh, yes, but those were for those other people. Two more things that caught my eye. You heard of a general named Anthony Tata? He's retired brigadier general. He actually in I think early 2020 he was considered for some job that required Senate confirmation in Trump's first term. And the Republican on the committee, the ranking Republican, James Inhofe of Oklahoma, canceled this general's confirmation hearing just a half hour before it was set to begin. And then Tata himself withdrew from consideration. What the hell would have caused that? Well, I guess what caused it is Tata said that former President Obama was a terrorist, a Muslim terrorist. And he also went on to say that the president, Obama, and his wife had engaged in borderline treason. Oh, there's also this. He promoted conspiracy theories that the CIA director, John Brennan, under Obama, was determined to remove Donald Trump from office, even through assassination. Now, why am I telling you this old history about this wonderful Brigadier General Tata, who even the Republicans in a still somewhat functioning legislative branch in 2020 refused to even hold a hearing to confirm? Well, that's because he's back. And Trump has now nominated him yet again, this time for a position in the Pentagon that would put him pretty much in charge of dismantling all diversity programs. And then, I don't know if you saw this one. Do you know who the transportation secretary is? His name is Duffy. Now, Duffy's got a lot on his plate because transportation, I mean, we got airplanes falling out of the sky every other second. What the hell's going on with that? Well, you got a new sheriff in town, and they don't really believe in government overseeing much anything, so I guess planes fall out of the sky. The transportation secretary is not concerning himself with the planes falling out of the sky so much as women giving birth. Now, I ask you, can you in any way, and I know some of you are very imaginative, can you in any way come up with some connection, really, some connection between what the transportation secretary oversees and women giving birth? Come on, I know some of you are up to it. Do it. What would it be? What would it be? What could it be? Maybe you saw the piece. The headline is this, caught my eye. Transportation funds to prioritize birth rates. Yeah, I know. It still doesn't make much sense. So that's one of those headlines that you end up sort of saying, I think I got to read this. I won't trouble your heads too much. I'll just say this. Our new transportation secretary, one Sean Duffy, has signed a memo that dictates how all the federal transportation funds should be dispersed to the states. Used to be things I'm remembering, like if a state didn't have like a seatbelt law, then their funding got cut. Stuff like that, made sense, transportation related. But one of the new directives is this. Any grant or loan program overseen by the Department of Transportation should prioritize projects in communities with marriage and birth rates higher than the national average. He's saying that they, I guess, can determine through public records where the most babies are getting born. And wherever the most babies are getting born, they are going to be getting the most transportation money. Even a guy at the conservative American Enterprise Institute is quoted in this article saying, it's hard to know what sort of transportation policy would promote fertility or marriage. But get this. Prioritizing areas with higher birth rates, guess what it does? It sends more money than transportation dollars to red states. The states with the highest birth rates, South Dakota, Nebraska, North Dakota, Texas, right? States with the lowest fertility rates, Oregon, Vermont, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, none of them voted for Trump. Yep. So uneffing believable cannot make it up. Chuck writes from J.D. Vance this weekend. He's saying here that federal judges cannot check the president. Yeah, I saw the quote. Unbelievable. That's what they're doing. They're setting up, not obeying any of the efforts of the third branch of government, the judiciary, to stop them. Here's your vice president, who's assuming he will become president. If a judge tried to tell a general how to conduct a military operation, that'd be illegal. If a judge tried to command the attorney general in how to use her discretion as a prosecutor, that's also illegal. Judges aren't allowed to control the executive's power. What the hell? Yeah, I see people saying we are in a constitutional crisis. Oh yeah. I that doesn't even seem to quite. I mean, Watergate was considered a constitutional crisis, and it looks like a third grade Tea Party at this point. Tea Party being the incorrect word. Um, yeah. Oh, this is more than a constitutional crisis. This is literally within 3 weeks of their taking office, an effort to obliterate our entire government. Um, and inasmuch as Americans are not concerned or are supportive, well, that tells you something, doesn't it? Tells you something you don't want to know, but it tells you something. The one thing I'll say about the halftime show, Kendrick Lamar, one of the first lyrics he sung, I know it was hard to hear them because they're so fast. They are worth looking at, but I found it wondrously subversive to do with the president in attendance because he quite clearly said, "The revolution about to be televised. You picked the right time, but the wrong guy." Now, I've, I've seen that might mean other things, but man, what it meant to me is yeah. Okay, a few other things, and this came. I had mentioned earlier that Reich is talking about maybe we have massive demonstrations on the 250th anniversary of Lexington and Concord, which is in April. That's a possibility, but see, these things got to get organized. What's going to catch on, I don't know. But here's another that I really like because it's sort of like a national strike, and it's coming before that. It's a national economic strike on February 28th, which is a Friday. This one I really like. And it's being called a 24-hour economic blackout. And if truly this gets going, if enough Americans agree to do this in a few weeks, we can flex our power. Because what is the power that Trump, Musk, the corporations, the people that hold the power or think they do, what is the power they pay attention to? Money. And guess what? we collectively have a ton of it. And they rely on us. As I've said many times, we have ceased to be citizens. Our job, according to the way our things work in this country now, is we are consumers. And our job, our responsibility to our country is to spend our money. So it is being suggested on Friday, February 28th, we pledge to not make any purchases. You're not going to shop online. You're not going to shop in store. You're not going to go to Amazon, Walmart, Best Buy, nowhere. You are not going to eat fast food. You are not going to put gas in your car on that day. You're going nowhere. You are not using your credit card. You are not using your debit card. The only thing that would be allowed is absolute essential things like some food. Although if you're smart about this, you would stock up on whatever food the day before, so that literally on that Friday, the 28th, you do not spend a penny. If corporations and if the banks only care about their bottom line, which is why they're bowing and scraping and acquiescing, it only makes sense that if we disrupt for just one day, we send a very powerful message. And if they don't listen, we do it again. Hit them where it hurts. A 24-hour economic blackout. I'm going to stay on this. I'm going to hope that it gets some traction. I am going to ask that each one of you send this to at least 5, 10 other people. I'm going to suggest that if we get this a little more off the ground, and it ain't just me, obviously, I just got sent this myself, that if you live in an apartment building, you type this stuff up and you slip it under the doors of everybody else, or stick it in their mailboxes, or even go door to door and give it to people, or stick it in their mailboxes, snail mail stuff. And on your Facebook and on your social media, and let's do something that shows our collective power. You don't have to get out of bed to do this one. You do not have to go march. You got to do something better that gets their attention. Do not give them a penny. Do not spend any money. Now, for a lot of Americans, that is inconceivable, I suppose. Tough shit. As I said, think ahead. Pay bills the day before, do whatever you have to do, but lock up your money that day. I think it's the best thing I've heard for some time. And I'm not gonna be here next week, so I can't, I'll hammer it. Please, all of you guys, do it as well. 28th. The 28th. I hope this starts getting some, I'll get this up on our Facebook page. Economic Blackout, February 28th. Okay? Some other extraordinary thing that happened, and again, I don't know what you're seeing or what you do. Media is, you know, if you're getting your news from television, fucking forget about it. I mean, you're not seeing what's happening. Um, Here's something that just blew me away. And this I got from Heather Cox Richardson. If you don't get this, is somebody who I learned so much from. You can too. And it doesn't cost anything. Just Google her and then get on her email list. Heather Cox Richardson. She said this, and I think this happened on Friday. The National Institutes of Health announced a new policy that will totally uproot how medical research is funded. The way it works now, most of this research is happening at universities like CMU, Pitt. When a researcher working at a university receives a grant from the NIH for research, that money includes funds to maintain the equipment and facilities and pay support staff that keeps, the labs that the work's being done on functioning. That is called indirect funding. And it is built into all university budgets. And last year, that indirect funding amounted to more than a quarter of all the grant money distributed for medical research. The Trump administration has just said it will cap the permitted amount of indirect funding at 15%. Doesn't sound like much, right? But listen to this. Every dollar of NIH funding that has gone out in the past generates about 2.5 times that much in economic activity. So this money is just hugely productive in many ways. Productive also in that it has generated 76 patents, which produce 20% more economic value than other US patents. This is medical patents. And has created opportunities for about 600 million in future research and development. One of the guys who's on the receiving end of this, this is all coming from Project 2025, who say that they're trying to reduce the taxpayer subsidization of leftist agendas, like curing cancer. One of these funders who's gotten this money, his funding, by the way, focuses on E. coli bacteria and how to keep it out of our food. He says when he heard this, oh my God, this is going to destroy research universities. I mean, they rely on that money. They budget for the money. They've already made decisions expecting that money to be there. Again, like he did with the grant freeze. This is going to literally stop all sorts of extraordinary research in its tracks. States across the country are going to experience significant losses, and red states too. See, this is where they're going to go too far. Florida, 8 Florida universities receive about $673 million in NIH grants. Almost a third of that goes to indirect costs. And then the change that has been made would mean a loss of $165 million to just Florida universities In Ohio, a loss of $194 million. In Missouri, 212 million lost. These are Trump states that he's fucking. How's that going to work? And understand, too, all those farmers who voted for him, do you know what a huge market their crops had for American aid, U.S. aid to starving people? When we were sending stuff, what the hell were we sending? We were sending the products of rural America. And they just blew up USAID. Those are all Trump farmers. These are Trump states. And I saw this today. Let me find it. I mentioned Pitt and CMU. They get huge funding from these NIH grants. I'm not even talking about what this funding is going to, the life-saving work. But the University of Pittsburgh received last year $661 million from the NIH. $661 million. In fact, that makes Pitt one of the largest recipients in the nation. Well, this news hit on Friday. This weekend, the provost at Pitt, Joseph, he has the unfortunate name of Joseph McCarthy, he and other Pitt leadership sent out an email to the researchers at Pitt saying, while we do not yet know the full impact of this announcement, because that's the way Trump operates, chaos, disruption, while we do yet not know the full impact, they made clear that the university and its very mission could well be harmed irreparably. Now, that's just right here down the street at Pitt, where they're freaking out. And you could say, oh yeah, those woke universities. Where the hell do you think all of that stuff that enriches your lives or saves lives, medicines, all that stuff, is coming out of these universities, out of this money? Wow. Just wow. All right, that's it, guys. I mean, um, again, I want to keep, letting you know I will not be here next week, and I hope it's not longer. But I'm having some surgery on Friday, and it's unclear, exactly what the aftermath will be. So, yeah, prayers accepted. So yeah, 3 more shows this week, and then I'm out for a while. I hope I'm still around for a while. Okay. So, yeah, guys, come on. We gotta fight. We gotta fight these sons of bitches. I have fantasies about them being tried at some point for treason. I have fantasies that we do prevail and they pay. God bless you. Have a good one. And remember that February 28th, Economic Blackout Day. Please, let's do
that. Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Thursday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper or its advertisers.